there's a benevolence to cycling, I think, in almost any government anywhere in the world. It's very hard to not be, it's green, it's nice, you can do it with the kids, it's cycle touring, it's all. So you very rarely get like a bad word, but you don't get somebody saying, this is top of my list. And particularly for Brussels, in our work in transportation and even in tourism, the perception is their job was to do the international bit. It was for cities, governments, national governments, and even national governments like in federal countries would say, hands off. Local transport's ours, and you guys worry about the rules for the single market, or you worry about the international trains and planes. That thinking has almost collapsed, because we will not solve our climate change problems. We would not have had kind of successful kind of health lifestyle changes because we were forced to stay indoors during COVID. We will not get out of Russian oil in Europe unless we actually deal with local transportation, get rid of emissions from cities. There is a real move now to tackle urban transportation as a source of emissions, as a source of congestion. And you can't do that without bike. So we've gone from being a slightly noisy irritant, shouting for bike, to being pretty strategically important. And that's reflected just recently. We've now have a commitment from the political sphere in Brussels to actually create a European cycling strategy, which is something I've been involved in lobbying for about 15 years. I feel like I spent 23 of the last years training for the last 2 years. It's like an athlete training all year to ride the Tour de France. Because certainly when COVID came, there's a toolkit of experiences. And where it differed is that, there have been other recessions, there have been other oil crises, there have been other opportunities. But we weren't represented by people or structures that enabled us to put our best voice forward. And so, when you walk in a room, have you got people who can present an economic argument? Have you got people who can present a social and environmental argument and package it and put numbers? And I think part of what I brought from my business career when I first went into the cycling advocacy world was the sense of that's your toolkit. You would never market a new product without doing some market research. I actually do quite a lot of coaching of advocates. And one of my jobs I did when I first came to Europe was I'd been coaching in 18 countries of grassroots advocacy groups. And that's so inspirational. But what we were doing is trying to create a toolkit of methodologies. And one of the simple things is a tool called stakeholder mapping. And it's just people standing in a Post-it note in a room going, right, well, who do we know? And it's like, okay, my friend's cousin's brother, knows this person. And yeah, but we do have a friendly journalist who rides a bike to work. And we do have that. And then imagining those kind of Post-it notes beginning to move. When the Russian oil crisis comes, for the first time ever, I've got political officials, civil servants in the commission, as part of our conversations, going, we need you. What have you got? We're going to have to get out of Russia. It's now a policy. We're out of Russian oil in 2 years. A high proportion of that's diesel. We're going to need the cargo bikes. What have you got? And that you get, okay, you're ready to respond, but it's a totally different level of just, cycling is essential, and it's even more, cycling is so essential, we need you. We know 1.2 billion was committed to new cycling infrastructure in the second 9 months, the 9 months at the end of 2020. absolutely counted. But done by grassroots activists, people sending in saying, my city's just announced this, my country's announced this, my government, the EU has announced this. And we could show 1.2 billion, and we can show how many kilometres were created. Not just new infrastructure, but fast track, you know, streets closed, bollards put in, those kind of stuff. And so we could track money and kilometres really, really fast. And now we're working to do similar kind of things. And so there was a European COVID recovery fund. We know 1.7 billion euros was given by the European Union to national governments to give to regions and cities, explicitly for cycling.
Wow.
Yeah, and in fact, when they've tried to do programs on the ground, some governments have found that the cycling bit is so much easier to do, they've even increased that. So we just recently heard the Spanish government had put an extra, from their fund, taken an extra 300 million for cycling infrastructure. So that's coming, and we are told that instrument is also going to be the instrument to distribute support funding for getting at a